The medieval Eurasian steppe was a peculiar cocktail of peoples and cultures, whose dynamics created confusion both for contemporaries and for historians. This vast territory was home to a constantly changing mosaic of nomadic and semi-nomadic tribes, whose wars, alliances, and migrations not only changed the geography, but often erased the boundaries between ethnic groups. A distinctive feature of the steppe peoples was their oral culture. They rarely left written records about themselves, which makes their history even more mysterious. The Pechenegs are a vivid example of such a people. Emerging from the depths of the steppe civilization, they appear in Byzantine chronicles and diplomatic documents as a powerful force to be reckoned with. Like the wind of the steppe, they appeared suddenly. Stirring up history before disappearing, they left their mark in the folklore and chronicles of neighboring peoples. Today, I will continue the series of episodes dedicated to ancient nomadic peoples. Before I continue, please don't forget to support the channel through sponsorship on YouTube or Patreon. We would also appreciate your likes, subscriptions, and of course, your kind comments. Well, let's get started with the topic of this episode. The origin of the Pechenegs, like that of many nomadic peoples, is shrouded in mystery, and their name sparks a lot of debate among historians. The word Pecheneg itself first appears in Byzantine and Arab sources from the 9th and 10th centuries. But what it meant and where it came from remains a subject of discussion. There are several key hypotheses, each of which sheds light on the possible self-name or external designation of this people. The main hypothesis is that the origin of the name Pecheneg is Turkic. Many historians suggest that the word Panjanak, which in Turkic languages means in-law or relative by marriage, could reflect the structure of their society. Kinship ties and tribal solidarity played a key role among the nomadic peoples of the steppe. This version is supported by the Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII Porphyrogenitus, who, in his treatise on the administration of the empire, mentions the Pechenegs as a people organized as a confederation of tribes. By the way, he calls them Pochinakitai. This is probably an adapted Turkic name, transmitted through the Greek language. Well, the more familiar name to us, Pechenegs, appears in Slavic sources such as the Tale of Bygone Years. The Turkic origin of the name is also confirmed by the fact that the Pechenegs spoke one of the ancient Turkic dialects. I also have to mention the alternative theory, which suggests the possibility of an Iranian origin of the name, since the Pechenegs occupied territories that were previously dominated by the Iranian-speaking Sarmatians and Alans. According to this theory, the word Pecheneg could have been borrowed from languages related to Iranian-speaking ancestors and could reflect local geographic or ethnic terms. The history of the Pechenegs themselves begins in the vast steppes of Eurasia, where different peoples have long clashed and merged. These lands, stretching from Central Asia to the Black Sea, were the perfect stage for migration and the mixing of cultures. The Pechenegs were no exception. Their ethnic roots go back to many different peoples, and their path to formation was as complex and dynamic as the steppes themselves. Even before the Pechenegs appeared in historical chronicles, their ancestors lived in Central Asia. They were most likely part of the Western Turks, who once belonged to the Turkic Khaganate. After its fall in the 8th century, the nomads began to migrate westward, bringing with them their traditions, language, and culture. Among them were those whom we now call the Pechenegs. However, Turkic roots are only part of the story. Over the centuries, the ancestors of the Pechenegs absorbed elements from other peoples. From Iranian-speaking tribes such as the Sarmatians and the Alans, they borrowed elements of horse culture and way of life. There are also possible connections to Finno-Ugric groups, including the ancient Magyars, who also migrated across the steppes. And the long subjugation to the Khazar Khaganate left its mark on their customs and traditions. The fate of the Pechenegs began to take clearer shape in the 8th and 9th centuries, when large migrations changed the entire appearance of the steppes. The fall of the Uyghur Khaganate in the east triggered a massive migration of peoples, and this forced many, including the ancestors of the Pechenegs, to seek new lands. At the same time, in the west, other nomadic groups such as the Oghuz tribes were gaining strength, pushing the Pechenegs out of their usual places of residence. Their fate became linked with the Khazars. During this time, their fate became linked with the Khazars. According to Byzantine chronicles, the Pechenegs were initially under the control of the Khazar Khaganate, serving as its vassals. The Khazars used them as a buffer between themselves and the more dangerous neighbors, the Oghuz and the Magyars. But the Pechenegs did not remain passive vassals. They began to form as an independent force, uniting different tribes into a powerful confederation. At the end of the 9th century, they migrated westward, occupying the steppes between the Volga and the Don, and then drove the Magyars out of the Black Sea region, forcing them to move to Central Europe. This migration was caused by the pressure from the Oghuz and Kipchaks, who were becoming their new eastern neighbors. The life of the Pechenegs was inextricably linked to a nomadic way of life. Their main occupation was livestock breeding. Huge herds of sheep, cattle, and of course horses, which were famous throughout the region, required a constant search for new pastures. That is why the Pechenegs rarely stayed in one place for long. They hardly practiced agriculture, preferring to exchange their goods for products they could get from their neighbors. Trade was an important part of their lives. For example, Rus bought livestock from the Pechenegs, primarily horses, and the Byzantines valued Pecheneg skins, wax, and even horses. These included slaves whom the nomads captured during their raids. These goods were sent to Chersonesos, where they were exchanged for jewelry, fabrics, weapons, wine, and spices. Moreover, the Pechenegs controlled the lands along the lower Dnieper, a strategic part of the famous trade route from the Varangians to the Greeks. This allowed them to collect tribute from caravans, which provided a significant income. The physical appearance of the Pechenegs is described ambiguously in the sources. Contemporaries noted that most of them were short, with dark hair and swarthy skin. Their facial features combined a European appearance with Mongoloid elements, reflecting the mixed origin of this people. They wore clothing reminiscent of Iranian traditions, which once again emphasized the influence of their neighbors on their culture. By the 9th century, the Pechenegs were already a powerful confederation, divided into two wings, eastern and western. Each of them included dozens of large clans. Each tribe and clan was led by princes chosen from the Council of Elders. Despite this element of democracy, they also had a hereditary nobility. Such an organization helped them survive in the harsh conditions of steppe life, where they had to be mobile and ready for battle. Their spiritual life also reflected the complexity of their ethnogenesis. In the early stages of their history, the Pechenegs were probably pagans. They worshipped gods associated with nature and the forces of the steppe. However, during their contacts with other peoples, various religions began to spread among them. For example, Byzantine missionaries tried to convert them to Christianity, though not to its Nestorian branch, and Arab sources mention that some Pechenegs adopted Islam. Among the Pechenegs, judging by the findings, there could have been followers of Manichaeism or Buddhism, which indicates the cultural diversity of their society. Despite their religious diversity, the Pechenegs demonstrated remarkable religious tolerance. Religious conflicts among them are hardly mentioned in the sources. The Pechenegs buried their dead right at their campsites. They did not have organized cemeteries. Today, archaeologists have discovered about 50 Pecheneg burials, among which weapons, jewelry, coins, Russian harness, horse bones, and clay pottery have been found. These findings reveal the diversity of their culture and way of life, which, although nomadic, had a deep connection to their land and traditions. Pecheneg warfare was typical of the nomadic peoples of the Eurasian steppe. Their army mainly consisted of light cavalry, which contributed to the use of tactics common among steppe peoples: sudden raids, feigned retreats, and swift withdrawals. Such tactics often led to confusion among the enemy. One of the key elements of their military success was rapid movement thanks to hardy horses, which allowed them to attack the enemy over a large area and evade counterattacks. Clan structures played an important role in the organization of the troops. The military organization of the Pechenegs meant that the tribes could quickly mobilize significant forces in the event of a conflict. However, the lack of centralized command made it difficult to conduct large-scale campaigns. There is evidence that the Pechenegs knew how to build siege engines and conduct prolonged sieges. This is confirmed, for example, by their attempts to besiege Kiev. Nevertheless, their advantage always remained in the open steppe, where they could use the mobility of their cavalry. The equipment of the Pechenegs was also designed for lightness and mobility. They still offered substantial protection. They wore light armor that did not restrict movement, as well as leather or lamella cuirasses made of many small metal plates attached to a leather or fabric base. On their heads, the warriors wore simple metal helmets, sometimes supplemented with a nose guard to protect the face. The helmets could be dome-shaped or borrowed from neighboring peoples. The protective equipment was complemented by round wooden shields with a metal boss. The main weapon of the Pechenegs was the composite bow, made from wood, horn, and sinew, known for its power and range. In close combat, they used curved blades to deliver perfect slashing strikes from horseback. They also used spears, and as additional weapons, battle axes and hammers. After migrating to Eastern Europe, the Pechenegs found themselves at the center of political and military developments, interacting with Rus, Byzantium, and other neighbors. For the princes of Rus, the Pechenegs became both powerful allies and dangerous enemies. Their first clash with them occurred back in the time of Prince Oleg. Russian chroniclers mention that Oleg made an alliance with the Pechenegs, using their military strength in his campaigns against the Kazakh Khaganate and in raids on Byzantium. This cooperation gave Oleg the opportunity to expand the influence of Rus, but relations with the Pechenegs were far from smooth. Prince Igor encountered the Pechenegs in a much more aggressive manner. The chronicles describe how the Pechenegs, now allied with the Khazars, attacked the lands of Rus, seeking to weaken the Prince of Kiev. These raids created instability in the steppe and forest steppe zones, especially threatening Kiev, which was a key trade and political center. However, this did not prevent Igor from also using the Pechenegs as allies. In 944, during the preparations for his second campaign against Byzantium, Igor enlisted them in his army, along with other allied and dependent peoples. But the Byzantine emperor found out about the impending attack and preferred to buy off the persistent prince. And since, as they say, the Pechenegs had already been paid for their services, he sent them to ravage the Bulgarian lands so the guys wouldn't sit idle. The relationship between the Pechenegs and Prince Sviatoslav was especially dramatic. He became famous for finally defeating the Khazar Khaganate, thus giving the Pechenegs a free hand. In 968, while Sviatoslav was fighting in Bulgaria, the Pechenegs laid siege to Kyiv. According to legend, the city's residents managed to fend them off thanks to cunning and the help of Princess Olga. But the threat posed by the Pechenegs became obvious. Later, Sviatoslav himself tried to use the Pechenegs in his military campaigns. But, on his way back from another campaign, he fell victim to their ambush at the Dnieper Rapids. According to the chronicles, it was the Pechenegs, led by their chief Kure, who killed Sviatoslav, and his skull was turned into a ritual cup, which became a vivid symbol of their harshness and warlike nature. Under Vladimir Sviatoslavich, relations with the Pechenegs remained complicated. They actively attacked the southern borders of Rus. To protect his lands, Vladimir began the construction of defensive lines known as the Serpent's Walls. He also established systems of fortresses along the rivers to restrain the Nomads. In 992, Vladimir achieved a decisive victory over the Pechenegs in the battle at the Trubezh River. According to the chronicles, the prince personally took part in the battle and was able to break their onslaught. However, the Pechenegs continued to be a threat, and Rus remained in a state of constant combat readiness. However, it was only Vladimir's son, Yaroslav the Wise, who was able to finally resolve the Pecheneg issue. He continued his father's work, building new fortresses on the borders and strengthening the army. During his reign, the Pechenegs attempted only one raid in 1036, but they were completely defeated near Kiev. This defeat effectively ended their active confrontation with Rus. The relationship between the Pechenegs and Byzantium was just as contradictory as it was with Rus. Byzantine emperors often used them as mercenaries in their struggles against other rivals, including the Hungarians and Bulgarians. However, when the Pechenegs became a direct threat to the Byzantine borders, the empire engaged in fierce conflicts with them. In the 11th century, the Pechenegs began actively advancing into Byzantine territory, threatening its northern regions. The Battle of Livonian in 1091 became especially significant, marking a turning point in their history. Under the leadership of Emperor Alexios I, the Byzantine troops, with the support of the Cumans, dealt a crushing defeat to the Pechenegs. The chronicles report that most of the nomads were destroyed, and the remnants fled and later assimilated among other steppe peoples. After the defeat suffered by the Pechenegs in the 11th century at the hands of Byzantium and Rus, their influence began to decline rapidly. Their military power was significantly undermined, and they lost the ability to threaten anyone. However, this was not the only blow to the Pechenegs. Throughout the 11th and 12th centuries, they were under pressure from new nomadic peoples, such as the Cumans and later the Mongols, who pushed them out of their usual territories near the Black Sea. Some Pecheneg groups were assimilated by these peoples, losing their ethnic identity. Some of the Pechenegs were resettled by Byzantium in the Balkans. They served as federates, allied troops provided to guard the borders and fight internal enemies. For example, it is known that some Pecheneg contingents participated in wars on the side of Byzantium, but their significance continued to diminish. By the 12th century, references to the Pechenegs as allies or as an independent force disappear from historical sources. Their remnants were assimilated by various peoples of the Balkans, including Slavs, Hungarians, and Greeks. Research suggests that the Pechenegs may have partially integrated into South Slavic communities that influenced the ethnogenesis of Bulgarians and Serbs. The Pechenegs played a significant role in the history of Eastern Europe and the Black Sea region, both as a military threat and as an important trading partner. They served as a link between the peoples of the steppe, Rus, Byzantium, and European countries. Their cultural and ethnic heritage dissolved among the peoples they interacted with, but their name remained in place names, legends, and chronicles. The decline of the Pechenegs can be seen as a result of interaction, an internal crisis caused by defeats, and external pressure from more powerful or adaptable forces. Like many other nomadic peoples, their history testifies to a rapid rise and an equally swift decline in the harsh competition of the Eurasian steppes. Well, that's all from me for now. Keep following us to learn even more about the history of various nomadic peoples, and not just that. See you!